All right, I've got the floor pan mocked up kind of the way that I like it. I got the inner tail pan where I like it. The outer tail pan is about where I like it. It's going to need some massaging, but I'm going to have to wait and do that once the floor is in there for permanence. Because once I get that massaged in there, it'll be welded in and I will be done, I think. I'm going to start off today by go ahead and throw some bolts in the trunk floor drop-offs. Get those bolted up into place where I like them so that they're kind of more permanent. Okay, I pulled the outer tail panel off here and went ahead and bolted up the trunk floor drop-offs. They're bolted into place, and then I started looking at this inner tail panel here and making sure that it's where I want it to be welded up here to the floor, and then as well to the gas tank mounts, and then as well I've got to build flanges for the frame rail. But then I started noticing that there's a pretty good gap here where on either side of the frame rail, like that's the frame rail there, and that's the the bumper mount here, which is all the support and tied into the frame rail and the trunk floor and all that good jazz. I don't think that gap should be there, so let's take a look at what came out of it and see what we've got. If we take a look here, this is where the frame rail was welded to that inner tail panel. Here's the frame rail here. I noticed this trunk floor, the old trunk floor is flat along here, whereas the new trunk floor, it's kind of raised up in that area to allow the frame rail to kind of sit up into the trunk floor. It's a little contoured. So there's one difference. If I take this guy here, this is where the frame rail mounts, and here's that area where the inner tail panel, trunk floor, and outer tail panel come together. I flip that guy over. Yeah, there are spot welds on either side of that area, and it fits nice and tight and flush. And I believe that that area has got to be strong because that's where the frame rail ties into the trunk floor and the inner tail panel. So I've got to come up with an idea to either fill in that gap or squish that together somehow. With the trunk floor in here, I wouldn't have access to that, so luckily I cut the side off of it there. If we take a look at this side, yeah, it's got the same issue. Now you can see where this is pushed up there, and that's the stamping where and you can actually see the frame rail flange inside there. I wonder if I extend that frame rail flange through that stamping area, if it'll fill in that gap enough to make everything tight. This side here, this is the one area that doesn't have that, so it's a lot tighter. But on this side, either side of that bumper mount has got the stamping into the trunk floor and a gap there. So I'm going to take a look at that and see what I can figure out. Okay, I think I've got about 3 different options that I can do here. I can either cut this inner tail panel and hammer it up, make it fit that contour, and then weld it back together, or use 1/8 inch plate and weld it up in there and fill in the gap and then have that welded. Or option number 3, which is to just ignore it, weld it here, weld it in the middle where it's tight, and then weld it on that side. I think that's going to be the best option here. It's certainly the easiest, and I think it'll work just fine and add plenty of strength because I'll have plug welds through to the flanges here that I'm going to make, and there, and then all along there, and I think it'll be just fine. Not going to worry about it, not going to be concerned about it, just keep on trucking. All right, now that I've got a plan for those gaps, let's move on to the next gap that I got to deal with, and that's along where this inner tail panel meets up to the trunk floor drop-off. There's a pretty good gap in there, so I want to pull this off and see if I can't tighten that up a little bit. The side over here is nice and tight, so it doesn't need any adjustment, but that driver's side, let's take a look at that. And while I've got this inner tail panel off here, I'm going to go ahead and clean up these frame rails here and get them ready to weld flanges to. What I'm going to do is just get a piece of 1/8 inch. I'm going to cut pieces of 1/8 inch and they're going to set right along in here. What I'll do is I'll bolt that tail panel back up here, and then I can hold it up here against the inner tail panel and up against the frame rail, and then put some tack welds on it and make sure that it's where it needs to be. Let's do that. Okay, I made my little flanges here. I've got this one here clamped up there. Let's take a look at it. Yeah, just clamped into place there on both sides. Throw a little tack weld on the bottom, throw a little tack weld on the top, and yeah, get them up on there. And here they are tacked into place. Looking pretty good up in there. Like it. Do the same thing on the other side, then I can pull off this inner tail panel and weld them up solid. Here's this side of them. They're looking pretty good. I'm glad that I did it that way, because any imperfection between the frame rail and the tail panel gets absorbed by this little flange here. You can see the side here, not real perfect, but hey, it's going to work just great. Same thing other side. Just got to weld these up, grind them, clean them up, and then I'm done with this little project. Here they are, ground and cleaned up and looking pretty dang nice. I like them. I think they look good. I think they'll function just fine. Let's test fit that inner tail panel and see. Like a glove. Tail panel's back on there, looking good. Let's move on. Next project. We've got to repair this guy, or rebuild it. This is the bottom of the inner wheelhouse over here that I cut out whenever I was doing that rocker. And this little guy goes right up in there. It's got to come over and then straight down and then tuck in, and then I've got to build a flap for this guy that goes over the top of it. So let's figure that out. Well, this is what I have to work with for the passenger side, and this is all that's left of the driver's side in that area. Pretty gross stuff, but I'm gonna have to remake it. So let's cut it out of some 16-18 gauge here and see what we can get. Okay, my plan here is I cut a piece that's bigger than what I actually need, which is good. Leaves me lots of room to work with. What I think I'll do is bend a 90 in it, and then open up this end of it, because it's a pretty sharp 90 here, but on this end it's all curved because it meets up with that inner wheelhouse right in the corner there. So that's my plan. Let's do it. Okay, I bent a 90 in this piece here and clamped the old piece to it to use as a template. Now what I've got to do is shrink that in there. So what my plan is, continuation of the plan, is cut this guy along this side here kind of in a curved pattern to follow the flat area of this here. Okay, and that'll allow this piece, this back side here, to fold over it and make that curve. So let's do that. Okay, I took it apart, marked it where I wanted to cut it, and then just cut a slit in that, and that's going to allow me to fold this over and beat it into place. And then whenever I'm done, I just have to cut off the excess here and then weld that up. Let's make that happen. Okay, after a little cutting and beating on it, I got her looking pretty darn good. Now then, whenever I'm done, I just need to weld up this little seam here, grind it down, planish it out, and you'll think that it was factory. Okay, I've got her just kind of test fit into place here. She's looking pretty good. I think this is going to be way easier to do without the floor in there, so I'm going to switch gears and start patching up this transmission tunnel a little bit where I cut it. Do a little bit of patching on that, mark out the floor where I want to weld it, where it's going to be welded, so that I'm ready whenever I pull this thing out of here. I can drill it and weld through primer it and clean it up and all that good jazz while it's out here, and then put it back in for the final time. So let's jump on that and clean that up a little bit. Okay, I'm welding up the transmission tunnel here where I cut it to make it fit the new floor pan. And it's got a pretty good gap there. Now the gap's not quite big enough to cut a piece of metal to fit into, but it's also too big to just MIG weld. So I'm taking a hanger, cutting it, straightening it, and taking the plastic off of it, just a regular wire hanger. And then I'm using it as like filler rod as I weld this. And just put that in there, and it melts and bonds to the floor pan there. I'll show you the driver's side. I've already done it and got it ground down. For the most part, it's looking real smooth. I didn't do all the way over here because I'll wait until the floor is out of there and then weld that up. I mostly just wanted to get this area done so that it won't move. It'll stay in the same place. And I'll show you what it looks like underneath here. There it is. Yeah, there's where I've been welding on it underneath, and what I'll do is I'll come in and clean that up and add some more weld and some more clean up and just make it look good. So we'll get that done. Okay, I got this passenger side part of the firewall welded up, ground down a little bit. It's going to need a little bit more work. She fought me pretty hard. But I'm going to do that after I get the floor out of here. So now I've got to remove the subframe jig, take the bolts out of it, set up my rotisserie here on the back side, suspend the body from it, and yank the floor out from underneath it. So let's do that. Well, I've about got her out of there. Taking it out is way harder than putting it in. It kept binding up here in the front. I couldn't figure out why it was so tight. Oh, it's because I didn't have my ratchet strap on. I run a ratchet strap between these drain holes, and that pulls it in a little bit, and then it won't bind up. But, you know, you struggle for an hour, and then you realize that. But anyway, about to get her out of here. Okay, got the floor out of there, out of the way. Now I can look at patching this inner wheelhouse. But I've got some issues. As I look at this here, there are two extra layers of metal in between these. These two pieces should put up, and there should just be a single seam. But we've got two extra pieces of metal in here. And the reason for that is whenever they replace the quarter panels, they also replace the outer wheelhouse. Now, instead of taking the old outer wheelhouse completely off, cleaning up the area, and then attaching the new one, they just zipped it off and stuck this on the outside of that. So these pieces of metal in here, one of them is the old outer wheelhouse, and the other one is the inner quarter panel bracing. And I'll show you that here. Here we've got the flange for the outer wheelhouse, and then the inner quarter panel bracing, which is sticking all the way through there. Now, that shouldn't look like that, and I'll show you what it should look like over here on the whiteboard. Okay, the way that this area should go together is you've got the inner wheelhouse, and so there's a flange that comes down, and then here's that inner wheelhouse, kind of comes down like that. And then you've got the outer wheelhouse, which again has a flange on it, and it comes down and it attaches to the quarter panel over here. So you've got that quarter panel that comes up and goes up to the roof line. And then on the outside of that, you should have the that inner quarter structure, and it should have a flange here and tie into that and then come up here and make that inner quarter structure. So what they did whenever they replaced this is they just came in here and they hacked this off right here, right? And they took that new outer wheelhouse and they just butted it up here and put it in here. So you've got these two extra layers of metal here, which I thought, you know, I could probably just weld that up and move along with my life. But I'll show you what else they did. So when they were putting this outer wheelhouse on and just butting it up against there, there's a big square brace, and you can see it right there. This guy right here. So they couldn't just weld to that. So what they did is they just cut the flange off. And that presents a bit of an issue in that you end up with this massive gap up in here where they cut that flange off. Now they had packed this full of seam sealer and coated it with POR 15 and undercoated it, and yeah, it worked okay, I guess, but it's not up to my standards. So then I thought, well, you know, if I just add a piece of 2-inch strapping and just strap all the way around this guy and cover all that up and weld it in nice, it'll it'll delay that being a real issue for some time, right? And then I got to digging around on the driver's side here, and the driver's side's a little bit uglier. Like this back section here was all coated with POR 15 and seam sealer, and I got to digging around on it and notice, oh look, it's all Swiss cheesy up in there. So that strapping's not going to be the best choice to do here. And I think about all the time and effort that I would put into fixing this just to have regular wheel tubs, and I figure, you know, I might as well go ahead and mini tub it while I'm in here. Go ahead and make it hold a fatter tire and upgrade it a little bit. So we're going to be doing that. And besides mini tubbing it, will give me a chance to go ahead and take off this inner wheelhouse, repair the flange on the outer wheelhouse, and maybe even correct where that flange is sitting so that the internal quarter panel doesn't cause any issues. But yeah, you can see how big that gap is. Like that's just unnecessary. So that's what we're going to do. And then as well, I've got a little bit of repair to do on this inner quarter panel structure anyway. Right along in here, there's some rust in there, there's some ugliness, so this will be the most effective plan, I think.